Zack Bowen was born on May 15, 1978 in Bakersfield, California, to Lori and Jack Bowen. He had an older brother who was 3 years his senior, and the two shared a close bond. The family spent a significant part of their early years traveling across states in a caravan that started in California. Initially, these trips were as idyllic as they had imagined, but eventually they decided to settle back in Bakersfield. Jack, Zack's father, found a job at a local oil company. However, the stability of a stationary life brought its own challenges. He grew increasingly dissatisfied with his work, a frustration that began to shape his personality. Jack started drinking heavily, neglecting his responsibilities, and distancing himself from the family. Instead of spending time with his children, he often went out with friends. His discontent finally reached a breaking point when he quit the job he despised. Meanwhile, Lori remained silent about the turmoil but was forced to shoulder the family's financial burdens alone. Money was tight, and there were days when the fridge was empty. She pleaded with Jack to find another job, and although he eventually did, it didn't last long. Desperation led him to take a bartending job at a strip club, but even that proved to be short-lived. Ultimately, Jack found work in Seattle, prompting the family to relocate. Zack was just 7 years old at the time, and the move seemed like a fresh start. However, it wasn't long before Jack slipped back into his old habits. He resumed drinking, staying out late, and neglecting his family as if he had forgotten his role as a father. Once again, Lori bore the weight of responsibility. Despite giving Jack multiple chances, she finally filed for divorce in 1990 and moved with her 2 sons to Santa Maria, California, to rebuild their lives. Returning to California marked a turning point for Zack, who was entering his teenage years. The divorce deeply affected him. As a teenager, he became known as a shy and introverted boy who struggled to connect with his classmates. By his senior year, Zack was nominated for Prom King, an acknowledgement that made him feel seen and valued. He thought that winning would signify his acceptance among his peers. Unfortunately, Zack wasn't crowned Prom King, and the disappointment struck a nerve. Feeling humiliated and rejected, he made the drastic decision to drop out of school midway through his senior year. For Lori, this was a devastating blow. Zack had been a bright student, and she had high hopes for his future. After dropping out of school, Zack had no clear plan for his future. With little direction, he decided to move in with his father, Jack, who was living in Seattle. This decision shocked Lori once again, as Zack's relationship with his father had been strained since the divorce. Although they had occasional contact, their bond was far from strong. Despite Lori's efforts to dissuade him, Zack went ahead with his choice. Had Zack stayed with Lori, she would have insisted that he return to school and done everything in her power to steer him back on track. However, living with Jack meant there was no one to challenge Zack's decisions. Freed from responsibilities, he embraced a carefree lifestyle alongside his father. When Zack arrived, it quickly became clear that Jack's situation was no better than it had been before. He wasn't acting like a responsible parent. Instead, their days were filled with cross-country road trips, endless parties, and heavy drinking. The father-son duo spent most of their time intoxicated, moving from one party to the next. Their journey eventually led them to New Orleans, Louisiana. By this point, Zack had grown weary of this lifestyle. What had once seemed thrilling now felt monotonous and empty. Tired of the endless cycle of parties and alcohol, Zack decided it was time to go back to school and finish his education. He enrolled in a local high school to complete his senior year. However, Jack surprised him with an abrupt decision. Feeling rejected by Zack's newfound focus, Jack announced that he was leaving. "You don't want to spend time with me anymore," he said before returning to Seattle, leaving Zack alone in an unfamiliar city. At just 17 years old, Zack was now navigating life on his own. He soon dropped out of school again, unable to fit in or find a sense of belonging. Without a clear direction, he began searching for work. By the time he turned 18, he had landed a job as a barista at a cafe on Bourbon Street. One night during his shift, Zack met Lana Schupak, a 28-year-old woman visiting New Orleans as a tourist. Lana worked as a dancer at a strip club in Texas. Zack offered her a drink, sparking a conversation that quickly blossomed into mutual attraction. Before long, the two fell for each other. Zack begged Lana to stay in New Orleans with him, and moved by his sincerity, she decided to leave her life in Dallas behind to be with him. However, there was a significant complication. Lana didn't know Zack's real age. At 28, she assumed he was older, not realizing he was only 18. Shortly after learning the truth, Lana discovered she was pregnant. The revelation left her feeling overwhelmed. She hadn't planned on becoming a mother, and Zack's youth only deepened her concerns about his readiness for such a responsibility. Lana told Zack that she intended to have the baby, but assured him that she didn't expect anything from him. She made it clear that she was prepared to handle the situation on her own. Zack expressed his desire to be a father and assured Lana that he was ready to take on that responsibility. Later that year, their son Jackson was born. Zack adored his son and committed himself to being the best father he could be, determined not to follow in his own father's footsteps. He worked long hours and took on extra shifts to support his family financially. Shortly after, he proposed to Lana, and the couple welcomed their second child, a daughter they named Lily, following their wedding. By the age of 20, Zack was married with 2 children. However, his bartending salary was no longer sufficient to provide for their growing family. Realizing the need for a more stable income, Zack decided to enlist in the U.S. Army in 2000, believing it was a practical choice for their future. With the onset of the Iraq War in the early 2000s, Zack was deployed to Iraq, an experience that would leave him deeply scarred. While there, he formed a bond with a young Iraqi boy, teaching him English during his spare time. Tragically, the boy was killed due to his association with the soldiers, and Zack was devastated, blaming himself for the child's death. This guilt weighed heavily on him, exacerbating his mental and emotional struggles. Eventually, he was discharged from the military under general conditions, cited for low performance, an outcome that deeply disappointed him. When Zack returned to civilian life in 2004 at the age of 26, he was battling severe post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD. Although he tried to pick up the pieces of his old life and return to bartending, he was no longer the same person. His experiences had changed him profoundly, leading to more frequent arguments with Lana, which ultimately resulted in their divorce. While working as a bartender, Zack met Addie Hall, a co-worker who would soon become a significant figure in his life. Initially, Addie didn't seem interested in Zack, but he persisted, often staying after work to spend time with her. Born on January 15, 1976 in North Carolina, Addie was an independent artist with a free-spirited yet sensitive personality. She had moved to New Orleans to start anew after escaping a toxic and abusive relationship, but she carried her own emotional scars. Addie had been diagnosed with bipolar disorder and often neglected her medication, leading to unpredictable mood swings. Her friends described her as someone who could completely transform under the influence of alcohol or drugs, becoming volatile and aggressive. Despite her efforts to rebuild her life, her struggles with addiction and mental health persisted, often clouding her attempts at stability. Zack and Addie's relationship quickly escalated, but their mutual reliance on alcohol and drugs created a toxic dynamic. Their lifestyle, marked by substance abuse, intensified the volatility of their connection. When Hurricane Katrina devastated New Orleans, their relationship took an unusual turn. Lana, Zack's ex-wife, pleaded with authorities to evacuate Zack for the sake of their children, even offering to take Addie in as well. However, Zack and Addie refused, choosing to stay behind in the chaos that followed the hurricane. After the hurricane, Zack and Addie formed a small community with other survivors, gathering around campfires to cook meals and sing songs. They quickly became the charismatic leaders of the group, earning the title of King and Queen among the survivors. Their resilience and unconventional lifestyle caught the attention of the local media, which began portraying them as symbols of survival and defiance in the face of adversity. Meanwhile, Lana, who had lost contact with Zack, assumed he had died in the disaster and agonized over how to break the news to their children. Her shock was immeasurable when she stumbled upon a newspaper photo of Zack alive and thriving as a leader of the survivor community. However, her relief was short-lived as she realized that Zack had shown no concern for their children during the hurricane, leaving her feeling betrayed. As the city began to recover and normalcy returned, Zack and Addie struggled to adapt. The influx of soldiers and the heightened reminders of Zack's traumatic past reignited his PTSD, leading to a sharp increase in his drug use that further strained his already fragile connections with Lana and their children. When Zack expressed a desire to see his kids, Lana firmly established her boundaries, telling him, "You can't just come back like nothing happened." However, Zack proposed meeting Lana first to discuss his situation before reintroducing himself to the children. Concerned for her kids' safety, especially with Addie now in the picture, Lana insisted on meeting her as well. Eventually, they agreed on a visitation arrangement, where Zack would have the children every 2 weeks. Initially, Addie seemed enthusiastic about the idea of being a stepmother, but her attitude soon shifted. She became cold and detached, avoiding interactions with the kids, who were only 7 and 5 years old. Although they were young, the children were perceptive enough to sense her indifference, which saddened and confused them. Addie's behavior deepened the cracks in her relationship with Zack. Their arguments grew more frequent and intense, culminating in instances where Addie physically attacked Zack. At the same time, Zack's tumultuous life took another turn, as he began an affair with a man he met at a bar. Being bisexual, Zack had always been open about his attractions, but this new relationship further destabilized his partnership with Addie. When Addie discovered the affair, her reaction was explosive. In a fit of rage, she hurled insults at Zack, accusing him of betrayal. Seeking revenge, she stole Zack's phone and called everyone in his contact list, falsely claiming he had AIDS. This malicious act marked a breaking point in their relationship, and ultimately they decided to separate. However, Addie's vindictiveness didn't end there. In an unexpected turn, she reached out to Zack, suggesting they give their relationship another chance. Disillusioned and now estranged from his recent affair, Zack agreed, hoping to find stability in rekindling their troubled romance. Addie suggested that she and Zack make a fresh start by renting a new apartment together. Zack agreed and paid 2 months' rent up front to secure the lease. However, the next day, Addie approached the landlord, claiming that Zack would no longer be living there and requesting that his name be removed from the lease. The landlord complied, effectively evicting Zack despite his payment. When Zack discovered this betrayal, he confronted Addie, and their argument escalated into a heated fight that lasted until the early hours of the morning. The following day, neither of them could be reached. Zack later informed friends that Addie had returned to North Carolina, a claim that put their concerns to rest, given Addie's known unpredictability and erratic behavior. However, Zack's own behavior grew increasingly bizarre in the days that followed. He immersed himself in a lifestyle of heavy partying, excessive drinking, and drug use. Then, on October 17th, 2006, a horrifying tragedy unfolded. Zack died by suicide, jumping from the 7th floor of a hotel. When the police arrived at the scene, they found a note in Zack's pocket that revealed the full extent of his actions. Send a police team to 826 North Rampart Street. You'll find my girlfriend Addie's dismembered body in the oven, stove, and refrigerator. This is my full confession. Along with the note, Zack had left the apartment key. Upon entering the apartment, officers were struck by the cold air. Zack had turned the air conditioning to maximum in an attempt to slow the decomposition of Addie's remains. The walls were covered in spray-painted messages. One read, "I loved her," while another stated, "I'm a failure." One particularly chilling message pointed toward the oven, instructing, "Look in the oven." Yet written on the oven door were the words, "Don't open the oven." When the police opened the oven and refrigerator, they discovered Addie's dismembered body. The scene was horrifying and initially raised suspicions of cannibalism. However, autopsy reports confirmed that none of the remains had been consumed. Additional notes left by Zack provided further details. In one, he confessed, "I killed her on Thursday night, October 5th. I strangled her calmly and quickly. It was all over in an instant." He admitted to fearing Addie, expressed no remorse for her death, and revealed that he had premeditated the murder. The case sparked widespread public shock and drew attention to Zack's PTSD. Many speculated that his unaddressed trauma from the Iraq War played a significant role in his mental unraveling. Others noted the apartment's location above the historic Voodoo spiritual temple, theorizing that paranormal influences might have contributed to the tragedy. This theory gained traction due to reports of strange occurrences in the apartment following the crime. In the aftermath, both the temple and the apartment became morbid attractions, eventually being converted into a museum with guided tours. However, the greatest toll was borne by Lana and Zack's 2 children, whose lives were irrevocably shattered by the tragedy.
Before we conclude this video, please be aware that the video on the left may be disturbing. It is recommended for adult viewing only. On the right, you'll find a playlist of videos that have been highly appreciated by our viewers.